Good evening, everyone. I'm Diane Fitzgerald, and welcome once again to our Ecoanxiety and the Pandemic course. Tonight is our last class, and this is the wrap-up as well as the call to action. So for tonight, as usual, please keep yourselves on mute. If you have questions and comments, you can send them to Leslie in the chat box, and Leslie will send you a message so that you'll have her name. And so tonight, we're going to begin this class with a brief retrospective of the last 8 classes. This PowerPoint will be about 20 minutes long. And I hope that it gives you all a sense of the whole and perhaps a time to reflect on what might have changed you on account of your participation in this class, this journey that we've all been taking together. Then following this retrospective, representatives of 3 of the most influential activist organizations in the country are going to speak to us, Sierra Club, 350.org, and Indivisible. And they're going to talk with us about how we can engage wherever we may be to support the great turning that can heal our world. And I'll introduce them individually a little bit later in the class. So we'll start and begin screening the retrospective.
Huh? Yeah.
What's interesting about it too is that it introduces sort of radical new hope, or at least possibilities. You know, prior to this year, in some ways, it seemed to me that our economic political system was largely frozen, in the sense that the elites, the political economic elites who tend to control things, were rather too comfortable. And enjoying their profits rather too nicely. And because of all that, it seemed like change had become very difficult. But now it really seems like the old normal is now gone forever. And in some ways, that's just as well, because the reality, of course, is that it was not that good for most people, and certainly not for the biosphere. All the problems I've mentioned, including epidemics, are not new, but deeply rooted. What is new, I think, is our increased awareness of them. Actually, though, the economic pause or shutdown has really had pretty small effects on carbon emissions or on the pace of other environmental degradation. But nonetheless, I think it is becoming clear that despite all the suffering, and I don't mean to minimize that in any way, our response to COVID-19 in one way has certainly kind of or opens up a kind of silver lining, that it helps us realize that social change can happen quite quickly when it's necessary, when it's perceived as necessary anyway. Returning to the coronavirus now. The pandemic reveals the obvious, that we are one whether we like it or not. I mean, clearly so does the climate emergency, so does everything that I've just sort of tried to summarize about the larger ecological crisis. But apparently that's not been dramatic enough for us to heed their lesson. Maybe the pandemic is forcing us to do that. But in both cases, whether we're talking on the individual level or on the social or collective level, I think it's really time to realize the larger implications of all of this. And by all of this, I mean the pandemic, right? I mean what it reveals about our government, our economic system, about racism, about the larger ecological crisis that has been accelerating, and yet somehow we haven't been able to focus and actually address it in the way that's necessary. When we put all this together, I think, how to say it, the ultimate source of the pandemic is also the ultimate source of the greater ecological crisis. That is to say, our individual and collective sense of separation from the earth. And unless we find ways to address that delusion, and part of that delusion, of course, is the idea that, hey, if we're separate, then our well-being, human well-being, is separate from the well-being of the rest of the biosphere. Unless we find ways to address and challenge that delusion, let's be frank, we cannot expect to have any future develop that we're going to be happy with. What's interesting,
we know Worden talks a lot about this task of mourning, going through kind of discrete stages. I'll leave it to my colleague to follow up later around grief. This is a really great model. But then also, this is a model I use a lot when I'm working with folks around climate change and how to maintain that position of accepting and acknowledging loss and anxiety and feelings of grief and going through your day-to-day. And this is built off of looking at sort of how folks recover from loss, usually loss of a loved one like a child or loss of a significant other. We tend to vacillate between being loss-oriented and the grief process and being restoration-oriented and discovering aspects of ourselves now. And I think as a culture and a society, there's a parallel here for us as we go back and forth. That's why it can kind of feel like very jarring, right? Even for ourselves personally. I want to hold this hope of kind of doing this good work, or at least this sense of purpose in my work, but I also feel dragged into this place of darkness and hopelessness or loss, right? So it's a process, and hang in there.
5 themes are, we need to broaden our perspective to embrace environmental intersectionalism. Dr. Hefford mentioned this, the interrelationship of environmental health and racial and social justice issues. A second theme is that we need to approach this intersectionalism in a holistic way. And third, the relationship between the climate and health outcomes is often nonlinear, as Dr. Hefford was referring to nonlinear outcomes, and they involve a multiplicity of factors. Fourth, it's tempting to blame all adverse health outcomes emerging in the 21st century on climate change because that's a big process that we know is happening. But there's a lot of other global scale changes going on that we need to acknowledge. And finally, the 5th theme, that mitigation measures that reduce greenhouse gases may be far more effective in protecting health and life than to try to adapt to the diseases and conditions that have and will continue to arise with climate change. In an open letter to all EU leaders and heads of state on this past July 16th, Greta Thunberg wrote, "You must stop pretending that we can solve the climate and ecological crisis without treating it as a crisis."
Should I do is a question people often ask me personally, what should I do? And I'll be very quick with this slide. There's no question the one thing you can do, and I won't get more political than this, but is vote. And I mean that very sincerely. People ask me all the time, and students ask me what's the best thing that I can do? Well, the first thing we can do is vote. That's going to have the biggest impact on policies going forward. In the 2016 election, 60-some% of us voted. A lot of people stayed home. The 18 to 25-year-olds, it was less than 50%. And so we can change these policies that have the potential to change our trajectory quickly, but we need the right leadership in order to do that. Show up for, we're here tonight. Show up to express your support for policies and public protests and public gatherings. I shouldn't just protest, but public gatherings to convey. Tweets are great, but I'm not. It's when we see people in crowds, hopefully socially distanced for the near term, expressing their passion for this issue. Means they bother to get there, to be informed about it, and they have something to say, and by their presence they have something to say. And then lastly, people have a lot of anxiety over personal behavior. I don't live in a tree hut and walk 40 miles to work. I think we all should be mindful and informed about the impact our lives have, with a carbon footprint of what we eat and how we purchase things. But do what we can in a reasonable fashion, being mindful of those that are less fortunate, but really emphasize the other ones. Show up and vote, and we can get the policies moving that we can participate in. Should I do?
Information that we'll be talking about tonight is based on Joanna's work. And the centerpiece of that work is something that she calls the spiral that reconnects. And this reconnection is to our intimate relationships with each other and with the world. And this spiral starts down here with the root of this flower, with gratitude. And gratitude arises from a sense of wonder and appreciation for life. And it strengthens our capacity for the next step, which is honoring our pain. This is the part of this spiral that we'll be focusing on tonight. When we're able to experience our pain for something that's beyond our immediate self-interest, what we discover is compassion and connection to the world around us. And that is what allows us to see with new eyes. So we see with eyes that recognize our, that we're part of a much larger story. And when we recognize that, we're able to go forth in the world and find our roles, find our role and our unique gifts in how we address what's before us. Unblocking occurs when our pain for the world is not only acknowledged, but experienced. So intellectual awareness by itself isn't enough. We have to give ourselves permission to actually feel and metabolize our anxiety, our fear, our sadness, our hopelessness, our grief, whatever is coming up that we're trying to avoid. Thomas Merton said, "The truth that many people never understand until it's too late is that the more you try to avoid suffering, the more you suffer."
Peskutumukad nyo, nagujaya uzibaik, madak meguk naganegot gok, makadi ni wake to get, nagadi west open. So what I'm saying there is that I'm saying hello to everyone here tonight. My name is Newell Louis. I am a Passamaquoddy tribal citizen, and I come from Zibayik, Madak Miguk, and Nagutkuk.
Native Americans talk about, or you've heard maybe a reference to thinking about the earth as their mother. And the earth is our mother, our sacred mother. And, you know, when I think about my own mother, right, and what was afforded me as a child, to the best of her ability, she provided me with food, water, shelter, heat. And that is also what the earth provides to all of us, right? So you can't distinguish, or I can't distinguish the difference between my Mother Earth and my mother. So I have to think about it in those terms.
So at the end of the day, right, what we get done, is that all we could, that's all we could do for the day. And likewise, at the end of your life, what you get done is that's all you could do as well. So don't despair. We're doing what we can do. And I don't want you to think that's not a suggestion to be a bystander. Whether it means standing up for our earth, for our rights, our morals, and for people who need you, and to be kind. Nurture and nourish the people around you by creating and sustaining a community of care, joy, and connection. Because we are connected on this planet, no matter what we do. Right?
At one point, a member of the group excitedly compared this time to the French resistance during World War II. Yes, we know it's bleak. Yes, we don't know what the outcome is going to be. But now is our time to respond to the crises of our time. And what better way to spend a life than to give yourself to that which you most care about? So this, for me, is an example of making friends with uncertainty. To be human is to experience constant change and to be aware of our own mortality. The American Buddhist nun, Pema Chodron, who is in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, she calls this groundlessness. Groundlessness. How can we relax into the groundlessness of being human? Our usual impulse, right, is to avoid it at all costs. It is to grab onto whatever we think will numb us to our basic groundlessness, whether it's drinking or eating or using drugs or watching Netflix or being overly engaged in social media. All of this are ways that we try to avoid feeling groundlessness. And Buddhist teaching is not uncertainty or impermanence per se that is the cause of our suffering. Rather, it's our resistance to uncertainty and impermanence.
Joanna Macy says that how we respond to challenges of our time is based on the way we think about hope. And she distinguishes passive hope from active hope, where passive hope is waiting for external agencies to bring about what we desire. So this would be saying, I hope you feel better. I hope you have a good time on your trip. Where we have no intention of doing anything to bring about that good time on the trip. Whereas active hope is becoming active participants in bringing about what we hope for. So I might say, I hope that planting an organic garden is going to help reduce my carbon footprint. Active hope is a practice. It's something we do rather than something we have. And it doesn't require optimism. We might be optimistic, but we might not be. But we can still have active hope, because active hope is guided by our intention. And we each bring our own portfolio of interests, skills, and experience to this project. In his 2020 address to graduates, Barack Obama said, "Hope is not a lottery ticket. It's a hammer for us to use in a national emergency, to break the glass, sound the alarm, and sprint into action." That's what hope is. It's not the blind faith that things will get better. It's the conviction that with effort and perseverance and courage and a concern for others, things can get better.
Literature, but it's probably most usefully summarized in this book by Donna Hicks. Some of you have read it, and called Dignity. It's a central role in resolving conflict. Donna Hicks is a conflict resolution expert. She's worked with Desmond Tutu. She's worked in Northern Ireland and Rwanda and all over the world doing conflict resolution. And she's come to see that dignity is at the heart of a large amount, really virtually all conflict between humans. And and has worked out some ways in which, useful ways in which to see it. So one issue that we run into a lot in environmental conflict, and really all public sphere conflict, but it's a well-described phenomenon in environmental politics and in environmental activism, etc., is this notion of devil shift. And devil shift is a situation where where you're, battling over an issue, and typically it happens rather rapidly, where suddenly each side begins to move apart. They become more polarized and more entrenched in their views. And they begin to see, and this is really important, they begin to see each other as less trustworthy, more evil, and more powerful than they are. And I and many other researchers have seen this example. Say that the country, the U.S. right now, is in a really large state of devil shift. We have had a very marked polarization in our political landscape in the U.S., and we see all the time. I mean, I'm getting really, really sick of social media, but one of the reasons I keep poking at it is because I'm interested to see people doing this, and it's patently obvious that people on both ends of the political spectrum are doing exactly this. And so, as you might guess, once you get into a state of devil shift, one of the problems is that you can't get anywhere. Literature.
So those brief clips of our prior 8 classes certainly don't do justice to the speakers' wonderful presentations, but I hope they gave you a sense of the whole, and for me, they reveal the intersectional relationship of these multiple crises we're facing: the pandemic, the environmental, the political, the racial and social justice. And tonight, we're going to carry on by taking up Dr. Fernandez's call to vote, to show up, and to engage in personal behavior that works for you. So with that call, I'd like to, and I'm delighted to, introduce tonight's speakers, who are important members of the ground team for the Sierra Club, 350.org, and Indivisible, working locally and thinking nationally and globally. So our first speaker tonight is Sierra Club Maine's Climate Action Organizer, Anya Wright. She is supporting climate action teams in their fight to implement climate solutions, such as developing community solar, creating town energy efficiency plans, advocating for public transportation, launching recycling and composting programs, opposing dirty energy projects, and much more. Anya is a graduate of the College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor, Maine, where she received her degree in human ecology with a focus in environmental law and climate justice. So Anya, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Diane, and such a joy to see you all. And I didn't make it to all of the wonderful classes that I just saw clips of, but I certainly wish that I had been able to, as they all seemed like they had really incredible messages. So yeah, as Diane mentioned, I am the grassroots climate action organizer for Sierra Club Maine. And I certainly welcome any and all of you to check out our website, and we have a lot of opportunities to volunteer and get involved in your own community. So certainly in terms of finding ways to get involved, if you're in the state of Maine, that's a great way. And then we also have chapters in other New England states as well. But yeah, I just want to reflect a little bit. My background is working at the global and national level. In college, I worked going to UN climate conferences with a delegation from my school, College of the Atlantic, and that's really where I got my first taste of climate action and getting involved in climate organizing. And something that I found there was that action at the global and national level is really not happening at all. And in a lot of ways, it's moving backwards and just not moving at the pace that we needed to, which at first was incredibly depressing and discouraging, and led to a lot of climate anxiety for myself. But something that I found a lot of hope and solace in is organizing at the local level, where I found that action is much more possible given our political climate, and given the complicated nature of climate action at national and global levels. It sounded like you talked about in some of your talks about the intersection between climate change and systems of oppression like racism. But then I also do a lot of thinking on how sexism interacts with climate change, how colonialism and capitalism and patriarchy interact with climate change. And that's something that's very reflected on the international level, where you have big fossil fuel companies having more of a say than small island countries. And you see just profits put ahead of people again and again. And so I think a big call of action for me, I loved what Ivan Fernandez said about showing up and voting. And I also really respect the personal behavior that works for you. But I think as a sort of like secondary part to that piece, I would love to challenge and ask everyone to do the work to dismantle those systems of oppression and recognize your own personal role within those systems. I think that's work that we all need to do. I think especially about in the state of Maine, which I know not everyone on this call may not be from this state, but to use it as an example, I know David Loy in that one of those first clips was talking about COVID being an equalizer. And I actually have an opposite reaction to that, where we've seen here that COVID is not an equalizer, that people of color, those without healthcare, childcare, et cetera, are at much higher risk for COVID in Maine. And that's seen, nationally and globally, but in Maine in particular, Black Mainers are 27% more likely to have COVID-19, despite being just 1.4% of the population. So as we think about these other giant issues like climate change, those are some issues that I and other Sierra Club members are really interested in trying to tackle on that state level. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there, but just really encourage you all to do as Ivan says, to vote, to show up, to volunteer your time where you can, and I'll drop a link in the chat to the volunteer page for Sierra Club, but also to just to recognize our place in these systems and to recognize the role that these systems play at the community level, wherever that may be. So yeah, again, thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here, and I'm so excited about all the work that all of you are doing. So thanks.
Thank you, Anya. We really appreciate your being here. And just so everybody knows, at the end of tonight's class, we'll have a screen that will have all of the speakers' contact information and the resources that they post. And as well, we do have a recordings document, which you may be familiar with because there's a link to it in your invitation email to each class. And if you click on that link, it'll bring you to the recording stock, and then you'll also see the information for tonight's speakers and the resources and how to contact them. So thank you, Anya, very much. And I will now introduce our second speaker, which is Mark Brown. Mark is the leader of 350 Down East, associated with 350 Maine and the global 350.org. He is a retired research scientist who did research on sustainable agriculture and ecology for 27 years with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. He also taught environmental science to undergraduate and graduate students at Hood College in Frederick, Maryland. He started 350 Down East to work toward reducing the carbon footprint of coastal Washington, Maine. A major activity of 350 Down East is offering an annual window dressers workshop that provides low-cost or free insulating window inserts for area residents. So thank you, Mark. We're delighted to have you here tonight.
Thank you, Diane. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to the group here. And I just want to say it was nice to be on the stage here with Anya, since I've seen her on several of the webinars this year, and point out that her action included being the youth member of the Maine Climate Council. And thank you, Anya, for that. Most important thing I think we need to do now is, of course, in the next month is, as has been pointed out, is to vote, and vote for the environment, however you think that works for you. But also, especially with the coronavirus, I think right now we need to educate ourselves not just about the global climate change and the effects of the global climate change, but also for the local and regional effects. And there are a lot. One way you can do this is through webinars. There are lots of resources, I know, in the 350.org site. 350.Maine is also co-sponsoring several webinars throughout the year with Sierra Club and other of their the youth groups and other groups working on environmental issues. The Bangor Daily News is sponsoring a series of 4 webinars. The first 2 have gone already, but the next one's on October 15th. And I was fortunate to watch the last one they did on climate change and the effect on the coastal economy. It was very good. And October 15th, they're talking about the effect on winter recreation in Maine. So educate yourself. There are lots of resources available through the websites. I mentioned window dressers in the introduction. And unfortunately, due to the virus, we are not able to do a workshop this year. Our people have to go into other homes to measure windows, and then the workshop, everybody's working together building these inserts, so it's not very conducive for spatial distancing. Hopefully we'll be back next year and do it. That's a great way to actually reduce carbon footprint here in Maine and throughout a lot of the northern states. Drafty windows and lack of insulation is one of the bigger producers of carbon in the atmosphere. In Maine especially, the heating oil is our main fuel for heating, and we have a lot of very drafty old houses. And it's a great way to work, and they're also windowdressers.org. And make sure you do window dressers with an s.org. Otherwise, you'll go to a site will tell you how to get your storefront set up properly. So windowdressers.org. And they are now working in Vermont as well as in Maine. Another thing I'd like to emphasize is that after the election, there's going to be a lot of work needing to be done. Not only, it doesn't matter who wins. We've got a lot of work to do to repair the damage that's been done to our national standing and our national efforts to fight climate change. In the state of Maine, we've had the Maine Climate Council, and they're coming up with lots of recommendations, which is being turned over in December to the legislature. And then there's going to be, let's hope there's going to be a lot of bills proposed based on that. And those are things that we need to help convince our local representatives to vote for these progressive actions to reduce our impact on climate change. The legislature in Maine stopped, I think it was in early April. It left a lot of business undone. One in particularly that 350 Maine is in support of is the legislation to restore the tribal sovereignty. And that's critical to allow them to have access, especially in the Passamaquoddy here, don't have clean water, and they don't have the authority to do anything about it. So that's something that's local for us here in Washington County, and something that is very needed. So we need to keep our legislators informed as to what we think they should do, and convince them to write to them, talk to them. If you feel up to going to Augusta and making testimony for these bills, all that's great. However you feel you can contribute best. Just remember all the interconnectedness that's been talked about through this class. You know, there's a lot of things that need to be done, but it's all good. And as I forget his name, but the Civil Rights Agency, it's time to misbehave. What did he say? Time to be I don't know.
Good trouble.
Good trouble. Yes, thank you, Anya. so time to have some good trouble for the environment. Yeah, thank you, and I'll be around the rest of this session if you have questions.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for reminding us of the importance of good trouble. So, speaking of good trouble, our third speaker, a dear friend and a great good troublemaker, Sharon Dean. She is the president of Indivisible Washington County, Maine. Sharon became mildly and passionately at the same time interested in the environment and politics in college. In 1968, she cast a write-in protest vote for Angela Davis in the presidential election. She participated in the first Earth Day, April 22, 1970. So did I, New York City. So did Bill. I know other people too. And she essentially dropped out of politics for the next 50 years as a sport she was no longer interested in following. She became re-engaged after the 2016 election, and now eats, sleeps, and lives political action primarily with the Indivisible Washington County group. And I can attest to that as well. So Sharon, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Diane. And I really enjoyed seeing that recap of most of the sessions I had seen and a couple that I hadn't. So obviously, talking about voting and showing up and doing what's personally right for you is incredibly timely right now. I do have to do a disclaimer. I'm unabashedly a Democrat, so all of my slides and all of my encouragement to vote has to do with getting every Democrat voted up and down the state, federal, local dog catcher ticket in order to succeed in what we need to do. I believe the next several years is going to start within 28 days, or actually has started now. In Maine, we can start early voting today. So does that mean you already did that? Yay. I'm going to share my screen because I learned how to do this recently. And I'm going to show you how to vote because I know you all know how to vote. And yet, depending on what state you're in, you may find it harder than it used to be. There's been incredible amount of voter suppression and disinformation and all kinds of things going on. So if you're planning on voting, which I'm sure you are and hope you are, this is the best site I found to go and make sure that you can vote the way you have in the past and the way you used to vote. You may know that Texas has closed all of their absentee drop-off boxes, except for one in each county. You know how big Texas is. So that's a clear attempt to suppress the vote. So this site is called vote.org, and you can do it piece by piece, check your registration, register, vote by mail. I want to show you this particular piece because I spent some time looking for it. And it is, when you go state by state, what you're going to find is that the resources for your state, all the state laws are different for voting, as you know, are very different, that when you can vote, if you can vote absentee, what the requirements are. And some of the state websites are not easy to navigate. On vote.org, they have listed the local election office. That's the keyword for every state. Sometimes it's hard to find it on their state websites. So this is Maine's. And then on that website, it'll be on the Texas website. It'll just be harder to find it. It'll give you the state election office. You can find your community, whatever state you're in, and this is the number you want to call, that voting person responsible for your municipality. And the other good website, oh, never mind, I took it off. It's 866 Our Vote. And I took it off because I thought I had not enough time when I did this the first time around. 866 Our Vote. It's a good website, and there's a hotline that's manned by volunteers every day of the week. So you can go there and look. So the suggestion is to make sure that you know how to vote, what your plan is. If you haven't voted yet, you really have a plan that's really going to work. And then you talk 3 of your family members or friends into voting as well. That's called vote tripling. When they know how to vote, then you suggest and encourage them to talk 3 people into voting. And if you do that, if you vote and you get 3 people to vote, we are going to be on target for a blue wave or a blue tsunami, if you want. But if you really want to feel good the day after election, you want to get some bonus points. And the way you get bonus points is you get non-relatives, non-friends to vote. Now, there are several ways to do that. I, as you heard, am involved in Indivisible, and there are Indivisible groups all across the state. And you can find your local group by join the movement. It's not surprising that the statewide United States map has a lot of blue indivisible groups on the East Coast and on the West Coast, but there even are indivisible groups in Florida, South Carolina, Michigan, all the other New England states that, can I get there? Yeah, so there we are. There's Goldsboro, there's us in Washington County. So one way is to go to Visible. I appreciated what Anya said. The other possibility is to go to a Sierra Club or a group that you're interested in and take action with them, and you would probably find something local addresses, whatever. If you do end up going to a national site of one kind, Indivisible National is focusing on different ways to take action, and they are encouraging people to phone bank and text bank. Those are direct voter contact, and write letters to voters. So if you happen to write letters to voters, some people don't like to talk to strangers on the call. They are hooked up with vote.org, and vote.org will let you sign up and write letters. So they'll give you addresses of people in states that are still trying to get people out to vote. And I strongly recommend getting a bonus point and doing some kind of action that's going to get more people to vote. The reason for that is that when we finish that, we will have completed job 1. And then we can go to job 2, which Mark talked about, which is getting the progressive legislation and agenda passed that will save our planet, save all the life on it, all the spirits on it. That is job 2. So get the tsunami, and we're at job 2. Now, what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is there may be a job 1.5 or 1.5. And that's because there is a strong likelihood, according to a think tank of 100 federal and election officials, experts, professors, campaign people, that have said that there's a very good likelihood Trump will not honor the results of the election. And given that, it will be necessary for people like us to take a mass action that will prevent him from taking that election-related power grab. This is the report. As on this link is the 22-page executive summary. This is called the Transition Integrity Project. You can wonk out and read that if you want to. It was published on August 3rd. Everybody lost their mind when that was published. 538 was writing articles about what if Trump loses. Atlantic Monthly, you've probably heard this one, September 25th. The article, what if he refuses to concede? Interestingly, the far right gets to read the Transition Integrity Report too, so they have their take on how it's really necessary for Trump to grab power and hold on to it, because otherwise the liberal people will steal the election. So if you want to go down that rabbit hole, which wasn't fun when I did that, feel free, but you can just Google that. You'll find a lot of right-wing sites that do that as well. But the good news is there really is progress from all of the groups that are working together. Knowing this has happened, we have a lead time, and many of them have formed together a Protect the Results. There we go. Coalition with there are over 100 partners now in this coalition. And I'm proud to say that 2 of the speakers groups are part of 3 of the speakers groups are all part of this coalition. Indivisible, 350, Sierra Club. Maybe I lost that. There we go. And so your organizations that you're part of, if you're part of any of these organizations, will be part of getting information on what's going on to protect our election. There's also the SIEU, the union, big union standing up for racial justice. So go there. And but your one-stop place, this is, Leslie said she would drop this in the chat box, so you can click on that to find a lot of information, is the Choose Democracy platform. It's not a coalition, it's a place where these groups are working together to put stuff. And the first thing you want to look at is the pledge. If you're comfortable taking this pledge that says we will vote, we will refuse to accept election results until all the votes are counted, we will non-violently take to the streets if a coup is attempted, and we will, if we need to, shut down the country to protect the integrity of the democratic process. If you're comfortable taking that pledge, you can sign that with your email and you will get on a mailing list where you will get the most updated information. As you can imagine, how we nonviolently take to the streets can look very different in a lot of different ways. How we shut down the country to protect the integrity of our democratic process can look a lot of different ways. And people are working on all of those plans right now on how to do that. So in order to stay involved and to know what they're doing quickly, I think it's a good thing to do. And so this 1 hour long tape I recommend you watching. It's by George Lakey, who's a Quaker who was in the front line of nuclear power plant protest, all this stuff for a lot of years. And he's come out of retirement. He's very active in this movement right now. He does a lot of trainings. He's really excellent on doing those trainings. And I can tell you some of the takeaways from his training if we have time, or if not, we can do whatever else we want to do. The last thing is, if you don't want to go crazy watching news, if you don't want to bounce around between Fox News and MSNBC, easy way to get your daily news is Heather Cox Richardson. She writes a daily summary every day. It's very balanced. She's from Boston College. She's a Civil War expert, really good daily summary. And Robert Hubble does the same thing. He does it every day. He's actually a securities litigation lawyer. Think about that, in LA. And when I first started reading him a couple of months ago, I thought, this guy's too pie in the sky. He keeps saying, well, this isn't really going to happen, and this isn't really going to happen. And he'll summarize the news, and he'll summarize this is what people are afraid of on the left, but he's not saying that so much anymore. He's not saying be hair on fire, but he's saying do your job, get out the vote yourself, and stay tuned. He actually has not listed the websites I showed you about Choose Democracy and protect the results. So as Diane said, all these links will be sent out along with this recording, and they are all hot, and you can read as much of this as you want to, and be careful for what rabbit trails you end up going down after that. So thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. That's a big wow, big presentation and information that we all need. And who would have thought when we started this series that this is where we would find ourselves here in October? So we are constantly having to be flexible and absorb what's happening and be prepared to support what needs to get done to contribute to this great turning that we are all committed to support. So we have a few minutes here. If there are people who have questions, please feel free, maybe put something in the chat box. I'm not sure if you have any in there, Leslie. I know there's been some messages in there, but I would like if maybe Anya, would you be able to talk a little bit to what engagement looks like with the Sierra Club at a time of social distancing, now that we expect social distancing to continue for quite a bit longer than maybe we had originally? How are people able to engage with Sierra Club?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm sure Mark and other organizers and Sharon and everyone on this call can attest how difficult it is to organize in a pandemic, but it's still happening. And I think one way to keep in touch with what we're doing is to subscribe to our newsletter and to sign up to volunteer. But we're still having a lot of meetings over Zoom. I'm helping to support our climate action teams all over the state, which are working in local communities to do climate action. And so it varies cat team to cat team, but they're doing work on helping towns write climate legislation. They're working on, doing socially distant gatherings or supporting people virtually. So there's still a lot of action happening, even though we can't meet face to face, but it's just different. So.
Thank you. And that's happening nationally, I assume, that you could sign up with these climate action teams wherever you might be in the country.
Yes.
Would you say?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. And anybody else have anything on their mind that they'd like to share this last few minutes that we have together?
I just wanted to let everybody know, Diane, that I got just about every one of Sharon's links in the chat box for those of you who, want ready access right here and now. You can paste it right out of the chat box as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we will, and all of that will be available on the final screen tonight, as well as at the recordings page. So just wealth of resources, Sharon. Thank you so much for providing them to all of us in such a concise way, because it's hard to wade through all of that, and you've done that for us. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure to do it for this captive audience.
Good. Yeah. And good, Anya's sending a chat about how to find your local chapter in Sierra Club. And Mark, I assume that's true with 350.org too, right? We can log on and wherever we might be in the country.
Yeah, wherever in the world, it's there's dots all over the place.
Yeah.
So yes, just 350.org gets you there.
Great. Well, thank you all so much, and we're going to conclude tonight's class with something that's a capstone, not just for this class, but for the whole course. And this is a recitation of the Ecosattva vows, which Richard Olston is going to lead for us. And Ecosattva is someone who takes compassionate care of the earth. And these vows were created by Joanna Macy and Chris Johnstone, and they appear in Joanna Macy's book, Active Hope. The Ecosattva group, of which Richard and I are both members, and many people who have presented and who are participating in this class, before our meetings, we recite these vows each time. And I'm going to screen share the vows with you now, and we'll all stay on mute and just have Richard recite them for us, but hope, I turn it over to you, Richard.
Okay. Thank you, Diane. I vow to myself and to each of you to commit myself daily to the healing of our world and the welfare of all beings, to live on earth more lightly and less violently in the food, products, and energy I consume, to draw strength and guidance from the living earth, the ancestors, the future generations, and my siblings of all species, to support others in our work for the world, and to ask for help when I need it, to pursue a daily practice that clarifies my mind, strengthens my heart, and supports me in observing these vows.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you to all of our speakers, but mostly thank you to all of you who have shown up here continuously, week after week. And I hope that this series has changed you in the way that it has changed me. So for tonight, we'll have this final screen here with the information I promised, and we'll say good night. Stay safe, and let's go get out the vote. Thank you all.
Thank you, Diane.